Rome didn't fall in a day, it fell over 300 years, and the whole time, most Romans had absolutely no idea it was happening. That's what makes it terrifying. Because the Roman Empire wasn't brought down by barbarians at the gate. It was hollowed out from the inside, by inflation, by debt, by currency debasement, and by a government that kept spending money it didn't have. Sound familiar? Rome at its peak was the most sophisticated economic machine the ancient world had ever seen. A unified currency, trade routes stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia, a legal system that protected contracts and property. It was, by every measure, the closest thing the ancient world had to a modern economy, and it collapsed anyway. So today we're going to do something a little uncomfortable. We're going to hold a mirror up to one of history's greatest financial disasters and see how many of our own reflection stares back. Here are 5 financial warnings from the fall of Rome that the modern world really should be paying attention to. Warning 1. Currency debasement is a slow poison. In the early Roman Empire, the silver denarius was the backbone of the economy. It was roughly 90% pure silver. Merchants trusted it. Soldiers were paid in it. Empires were built on it. But somewhere around the 3rd century AD, Rome started running out of money. Wars were expensive. The bureaucracy was expanding. The borders needed defending on multiple fronts. So Roman emperors did what cash-strapped governments throughout history have always done. They quietly started cheating. They began shaving silver out of the coins, just a little at first, then more. By the reign of Emperor Gallienus in the 260s AD, the denarius was barely 2% silver. It was essentially a bronze coin with a thin silver wash that rubbed off in your hand. The result was textbook inflation. Prices in Roman Egypt, where we have detailed papyrus records, increased by roughly 15,000% between the 1st and 4th centuries. Merchants stopped accepting coins at face value. Soldiers demanded payment in goods instead of money. The entire monetary system began to unravel. The modern parallel isn't difficult to see. We don't shave silver from coins anymore. We just print more money. Between 2020 and 2022 alone, the US Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by over $4 trillion. The UK, the EU, Japan, all followed suit. The mechanism is different. The dynamic is identical. When governments fund spending by expanding the money supply rather than through real productivity, inflation follows. Rome learned that lesson the hard way over 3 centuries. We've been relearning it in real time. Warning 2. Military overextension will break the bank. At its height, the Roman Empire was defending a border that stretched over 5,000 kilometers. That required an enormous standing army, and an army costs money every single day, whether there's a battle or not. As the borders grew harder to defend, Rome started hiring foreign mercenaries. They were cheaper short-term, but they had no loyalty to Rome itself. When the money stopped coming, so did their commitment to the empire. Military spending consumed somewhere between 50% and 75% of the Roman imperial budget by the later empire period. That left almost nothing for infrastructure, for investment, or for the internal economic development that could have actually strengthened the empire long-term. Today, global military expenditure hit $2.44 trillion in 2023, according to CIPRI, the highest figure ever recorded. The United States alone spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. That spending crowds out investment in education, infrastructure, and innovation, the exact foundations that sustain long-term economic competitiveness. Rome didn't just overspend on its military, it overspent on its military while the domestic economy quietly deteriorated. That combination, external financial drain alongside internal neglect, is what eventually made the empire too brittle to survive pressure. Warning 3. Tax complexity kills productivity. Rome's tax system started relatively simple, but as the empire needed more money, it got creative. Property taxes, inheritance taxes, sales taxes, special levies for wars, taxes on trades, on marriages, on the freeing of slaves. By the 4th century, the tax burden on ordinary Romans had become so crushing that something extraordinary happened. People started voluntarily abandoning their land and property and surrendering themselves into serfdom to wealthy landowners, just to escape the tax collector. They gave up their freedom to avoid the bill. The wealthy, of course, found workarounds. They always do. They moved assets, exploited legal loopholes, bribed officials. The tax burden fell disproportionately on the middle, the merchants, the small farmers, the tradespeople, until that middle class simply ceased to exist. An economy without a functioning middle class cannot sustain itself. Consumer spending collapses, tax revenues fall further, government borrows or debases more to compensate. It becomes a spiral. The warning here isn't that taxes are inherently bad. It's that a tax system that becomes too complex, too burdensome, and too easy for the powerful to avoid will systematically destroy the productive backbone of the economy. That pattern has repeated itself in every major economic collapse since Rome, and the conditions for it are not exactly difficult to spot in the modern world. Warning 4. Political instability is an economic weapon. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had over 50 emperors. That's roughly one new emperor every 9 months. Most of them were assassinated. Many were military generals who seized power by force. Imagine trying to run a business in that environment. Trade contracts become worthless when the government changes every few months. Long-term investment disappears because nobody knows what the rules will be next year or who will be making them. Capital moves to wherever stability can be found. Economic confidence is fragile. It depends on predictability, on the reasonable expectation that contracts will be honored, that institutions will function, that the rules won't be rewritten overnight. When political systems become chaotic and self-serving, that confidence evaporates, and with it, the investment and trade that keeps an economy alive. We live in a period of significant political turbulence across Western democracies. That's not a political comment, it's a financial one. Markets don't care about ideology, they care about stability and predictability. Rome's crisis of the 3rd century is a case study in what happens to an economy when those things vanish. Warning 5. Complexity becomes fragility. The Roman economy worked brilliantly when all of its parts were functioning together. Trade networks, currency, legal systems, infrastructure, military protection. It was deeply interconnected. That interconnection was its greatest strength. It was also its greatest weakness. When one system began to fail, say the currency, it stressed every other system connected to it. Merchants couldn't price goods reliably. Tax revenues fell in real terms. The army couldn't be paid. Border security weakened. Trade routes became dangerous. Each failure compounded the next. Modern economies are arguably more interconnected than Rome ever was. The 2008 financial crisis demonstrated in vivid detail how a problem in one part of the US mortgage market could cascade across the entire global financial system within months. Supply chain disruptions during 2020 and 2021 showed how a shock in one region could ripple through global manufacturing almost overnight. Complexity creates efficiency. It also creates the conditions for catastrophic cascading failure. Rome had no circuit breakers. The question worth asking is whether we have enough of our own. Rome didn't collapse because Romans were stupid or weak. It collapsed because problems that were manageable at any individual stage were left unaddressed long enough to become structural. By the time the consequences were impossible to ignore, the tools to fix them no longer existed. History rarely sends dramatic warnings. It sends slow, boring, easy-to-rationalize ones, until it doesn't. The good news is that knowing the pattern is the first step to not repeating it. And you're already here, which means you're paying attention. If you found this video useful, the algorithm genuinely needs you to hit like. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel reach people who actually care about understanding how money and history connect. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and drop in the comments which of these 5 warnings you think is the most relevant to today's economy. I read every single one. See you in the next one.